that mostly.
Oh. Yes, so I'm sure that the train wreck that people on Facebook have just logged in to see.
Are you on Facebook?
We are, yes, we are Facebook Live. We are live in the studio today, and we're going to be talking about emergency management and planning, whether it's a small, there's no such thing as a small emergency, is there, Rick? An emergency is an emergency.
It is.
So we're going to be talking about how you can prepare and plan, what planning goes on behind the scenes for local emergencies as well as national ones. And Deputy Emergency Manager Rick Farrell is here, and I got a Yahoo sitting back here behind me that I'm going to sit like this so all you can see is his arm, Fire Marshal Jerry Mayatico. And then the amazing, wonderful, never was there ever a better fire chief on the planet than Chief Maybe with Warren County Fire and Rescue.
God, I love you.
So first, Rick, tell me a little bit about what your office does specifically within Warren County Fire and Rescue.
Sure. Specifically this week, our emergency management section, we've been updating with the Virginia EOC for the past couple of days. We're very attuned to the weather with Hurricane Irma. We had a weather briefing yesterday. We've had 2 weather briefings today, so we're monitoring that. And the good news is right now the effects of Irma should go to the west of the state, kind of along the line between Atlanta and Nashville. So most of the Commonwealth should be spared the major impacts from Irma.
We're going to get a little rain, but we're not going to get anything to the degree that everybody else is going to get.
That's right. Yeah, we might get 1 or 2 inches of rain. We need to be ready for perhaps some tornado activity that comes off of the outer bands of the storm, and maybe some local flooding.
Well, and that makes sense. And one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to have this conversation today is everybody is in the mindset of there's a hurricane coming, whether it's happening in Florida, whether it was the one that just happened in Houston. People tend to think, what would I do? So I wanted to kind of capitalize on that because we have not hurricanes typically in this area, but we have smaller emergencies that happen in and around, Front Royal, Warren County, up and down the Shenandoah Valley throughout the year. And you need to be prepared for that now in case something like that happens tomorrow, next week, next month, or, especially this winter. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that, about things that happen here locally. We've had a few. I mean, there have been a few things that have happened here. Chief will remember several years ago when we had the fire out on Skyline Drive. That was a big deal.
For us it was, you're right.
And it took a lot of resources. And you had locals that were worried about losing their houses. You were concerned about whether or not...
You remember we had 2 fires. We had the 2,000-plus acre fire in Bentonville. Started at the lower levels and worked its way up to the Skyline Drive. And we also had a mountain fire in Linden going at the same time.
And those are hard to manage because I remember at the time... You were on the front lines. Everybody, it was all hands on deck. Everybody was out, I joked with you at the time with a hose in their hand trying to help kind of stomp these fires down. It was very difficult for you to get information out to the general public about what the status was, where you thought it was moving to, what your next, course of action was going to be. And that's kind of when I stepped in and helped at least get some of that information out to the press. The more prepared people are when something like that happens, the easier it makes your job, I would assume.
Absolutely. And I would say that I have to assume that folks around here are taking this storm serious because I went this morning to Walmart to get water, and they were just about out of water. So either people are thirsty right now, or they're maybe thinking about a storm right now.
And so if somebody is putting together, say they're concerned, say we're going to get, maybe it gets a little closer than any of us anticipate, and we're going to get several inches of rain in a small amount of time, which is what typically happens when you've got your flash flood warnings and that sort of thing. What are some things that you then have to think about putting into place? How do you decide when it's time to open a shelter, for example?
Well, the first thing we would look at is what are the conditions here in the county. We're always monitoring the river gauges all the way down to Luray into Front Royal and seeing what the river may be doing. So if the river starts to rise and cut off a particular part of town, we may need to open a shelter there. But more likely in our scenario, it would be perhaps a winter shelter where people are either snowbound and they want to get out of the mountains so they're not stuck if they don't have a generator, or they've perhaps lost power and heat and they just need a place to get warm.
And typically when you open those shelters, how do you get the word out about that? I mean, I know you call us, but do you have any kind of a communication system that you can direct to people in certain neighborhoods and areas?
That's right. So perfectly, as we talked last time about Smart 911, I'll give that pitch again. I can't urge folks enough to sign up for Smart 911, www.smart911.com, and that allows them to get emergency notifications on their cell phone if they don't have a hard line phone, an old school phone, if you will, in their house. So by signing up for smart911.com, you will get those notifications. Also, you can put in important information, perhaps about your medical condition, that a dispatcher could see if you ever have to call 911 in an emergency.
And that's great because you can put in, if you're a diabetic, you can put in if someone in your household is, for example, in a wheelchair, if someone has a heart condition. Those are all helpful pieces of information for you to have before you have to go and potentially make a rescue.
That's right. And also you can put in information about your car and your pets. You don't think about that. Maybe somebody stole your car, you call 911, and that information is already there, so you don't have to find it. Likewise, if you have pets in the home and we have to come into the house, it would be very nice if we knew if you've got a Rottweiler on the other side of that door, so we can deal with the animal.
And the temperament
to get to you.
of that particular
That's
animal.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And pets brings up another question that I had for you, in that pets are typically not allowed in the shelters that you create when we have an emergency like that. Is that right?
That's right. Our primary shelters here in the county are Skyline High School and the new Warren Middle School. Pets are not allowed in those shelters, so we urge everyone to take care of their pets with a neighbor. If they need to take a pet somewhere, the Humane Society is available to take your animals to, as well as the 4-H Center at the fairgrounds and the livestock barn out on Rivermont Road.
So kind of keep that in mind. And I'm sure that, I don't have any pets, but I'm sure those that have pets, they're like children. So they tend to think in those terms too. So do you have a lot of people that normally show up at a shelter with a dog or a cat or, where'd Jerry go? A turtle? That was our joke at our show last week, is I want a turtle. I have since gotten a turtle, by the way.
Did you really?
Yes.
Come on, Tim.
No, Liz. Liz bought me a turtle. I'll go get it. It's in my office.
Oh, all right.
I would imagine that some people will bring their pets to the shelter, and I would really urge them not to, because if they decide to leave them in their car, it could be too hot in the summer and it could be too cold in the winter for their pets. And the Sheriff's Department may not have the deputies available to assist them in relocating their pets, because they're going to be pretty busy with other things.
Managing the emergency
Right.
itself. Now, when you open these shelters, how do you then run them? Do you need volunteers? I know you have a CERT program. Can you tell me a little bit about what CERT is?
Sure. Our Community Emergency Response Team, those folks are primarily managing our emergency situations and community response and preparations and education. Jerry just gave us a great class last night on engaging your community. So something we want to get our CERT folks out there and get the word out about important things such as fire safety and other life safety issues, to educate the public ahead of time to perhaps prevent an emergency from occurring in the first place.
So, Jerry, please come. Join us.
Well, I was trying to share this.
What would you like the community to be educated about when it comes to an emergency? If there was one piece, and I know there's several pieces, but if there was one thing that you want to make sure everybody knows, what is it?
Well, certainly, Janet. I mean, when we talk about disaster preparedness, everybody's concerned with losing power, electricity, sheltering. Where am I going to go if it's too hot? Where am I going to go if it's too cold? But there's always that fire safety aspect to these disasters as well. Securing the utilities, i.e. your propane tanks, your water, for if you lose power, we're going to lose heat in the home. If you evacuate your home, you don't want to bust the water pipes and flood your home, those types of things. But also too, we see, whether it be a snowstorm, a hurricane, severe thunderstorms, is if we lose power, what was on in your home when you lost power? So you have to understand, when that power is re-energized and power is restored to your property, everything is going to come back on at one time. It's going to put a very large load on your electrical system of your home. Then also too, if you lost power in the middle of preparing a meal, is that stovetop still on? You know, so we see fire incidents that have resulted from that. You know, power was interrupted. I just walked away because I couldn't cook anymore. My attention's been broke, so my focus is now on what am I going to do?
Where are the kids? What do I need to gather?
Yeah.
Do I need to think about leaving the home?
You know, so there is that fire safety consideration as part of that with, you know, and on the website, warrencountyfire.com, if you visit the emergency management, there's all of those useful tips on there. You know, I just seeing the stories coming out of Florida and the amount of people going out and buying generators, and you know, there's a safety aspect with using those generators. You know, carbon monoxide poisoning. You know, we put the generator in a garage and we don't provide it appropriate ventilation. We keep the generator outside and we're running the cords through a window, and that generator is right underneath of that window that's cracked open to allow them cords through. So without the proper distance and ventilation, you know, certainly we can, you know, have a reverse effect of using that device. You know, so we always want to, you know, remind people to be mindful of those types of things. You know, from the emergency medical services side is, you know, always looking at, you know, the food. How long is the food going to last in the refrigerator? And my medicine, you know, are you stocked up on your prescription pills? And those types of things. And, you know, so, and that's what we say is, you know, disasters don't wait, neither should you. Be prepared. Go out, buy you a case of water. If you don't use it, if Irma decides to take that left-hand turn and leaves us alone, you have it. You have it for the winter. You have it for the next storm.
Water doesn't expire, so that's the one thing you don't have to worry about.
So, you know, just canned goods, water, extra batteries. These are all things that's, you know, not detrimental. You're going to use them eventually once we get out of the, you know, the hurricane season. But as soon as you leave the hurricane season, you're right back into now our severe weather in the wintertime or our blizzards, you know. So, you know, you have that long-term effect to, you know, put one kit together, and it's going to last you, you know, through many different obstacles.
So, Rick, do you have any, like a specific list of things or things people might not think of to put in that emergency kit? I did a little bit of research on the internet and found all kinds of cool stuff. But
absolutely,
I
Janet.
knew you would be
We've got
prepared.
all
This is
kinds
why.
We've got color flyers, and I'll even give a copy to you. So, the biggest thing, we talked about water. An easy planning factor is 1 gallon of water a day per person. Very easy to remember. You know, and in my own research about water, what I do want to let folks know is when you go to the store to buy a gallon of water, it's in a food-grade container. Don't go think you're going to stockpile water, and now I just heard of Johnny and Roy going through my head. You know?
Thanks, Chief.
Squad 51. So, you know, you wouldn't want to take your Lowe's 5-gallon bucket to store water in long term because
Right.
it's not a food-grade container. So keep your water in a food-grade container. Again, it's 1 gallon of water per person. And don't forget about your pets and infants for formula and things like that as well.
Well, and the thing that you want to keep in mind when you're putting together this emergency kit is you're not packing for the beach. So you don't necessarily need to pack a lot of the things that you may think in a non-emergency situation are critical to your day-to-day life. You want to think about, okay, if I were trapped in the woods or I were in my house without power, without heat, without what am I going to need? I'm not necessarily going to throw my makeup in an emergency bag. Well, I might, because I wouldn't want you to make fun of me if you have to show up at my house and rescue me, but that's a whole other story. But things along
But you
those
look good.
lines. Yeah, I got to look good when the cameras come and want to find out how this all happened.
Well, you know, it's that simple steps. I mean, if it's calling for bad weather at my house, you know, I have a 4-year-old, and now I have a 2-year-old. Happy birthday, Ashley. Is when you get in that routine. Okay, so we stop up the bathtub after bath night, and we fill the bathtub up with water. You know, so that gives us enough water to, you know, use the commode to flush the commode. Then, you know, we are taking and we're storing 5 gallons in a contractor style cooler. You know, so there's enough drinking water. You know, not necessarily enough, but enough to get through a 24-hour power outage. We're filling up bags of freezer bags of water, putting in the chest freezer. So now we have an additional water reserve and supply. That's also helping keep the freezer and items in the refrigerator cool. So if you get into that repetition, you know, canned goods, those types of things, you know, when the disaster does come, you're going to be prepared, you know, versus doing nothing. And that's, you know, what we're seeing out of Houston and out of Florida. And, you know, Florida is learning from what Houston just went through. And they see, you know, they are able to directly relate that. You know, we talked last night in this Engaging Your Community class, and Chief can speak on, I don't remember, you know, but Hurricane Fran, you know, I remember going outside and playing in a lot of water, you know. But, you know, when we directly related that on our Facebook page, that we have to keep an eye on Irma because it's the same characteristics of Hurricane Fran. You know, when Fran hit in 96, you know, and that directly affected a lot of people in the community. If you look at the comments on Warren County's Facebook page, people were able to take this storm and directly relate it to a past experience. They experienced this firsthand, and they were affected by it in one fashion, form, or another. That's what Florida's doing with you know, Houston. They're learning from what just took place in Houston, and wow, you're right, you know. A lot of people think, oh, well, hurricanes, I got a really strong built house, but it's the other effects. You know, when you have the governor saying, look, you might live above, you know, flood stage, and you might be okay if you stay in your home structurally, but we're not coming to get you. We don't have the resources in this disaster to come get you in the middle of a hurricane. That says a lot. It's a very powerful message.
Yeah. Well, and that's what always disturbs me when I saw some of the things from Houston and more recently in Florida. They interviewed somebody on the news last night that her husband had built that house and they had built it to hurricane grade. She made a point of knocking on the windows and talking about how they're, you know, they could withstand all of these winds. My husband, and you know, he's got this snarky little sense of humor, he said that window's not going to stop a tree when it decides to blow over from the hurricane. So it may sustain the wind, but it's not going to sustain the tree, and you can't predict in an emergency situation like this all of the other things that could potentially happen.
No, absolutely.
So what about if you're in your car? What if you're in your car trying to leave your home? Are there things you should have in your car that are good emergency kits to have, other than your basic first aid stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, you want the same essential supplies in your car as you have, I mean, in your home, you know, reserve water, some type of radio so you can hear what's going on. You know, some people put a seatbelt cutter, you know, where they can access it in case you hit that, you know, that flash flood or you're affected by that. You know, blankets in the wintertime, those types of things. We're seeing so many stories where people are getting their, you know, car stuck, stranded, those types of things in these disasters, or trying to evacuate from these disasters, and they're not prepared in the car. And you're absolutely right. You're not packing for the beach. You know, get the essentials, get enough stuff in the car in case something does happen, and be ready.
So, and typically here, because we don't normally have them to the scale that they're going through in Houston and they're about to go through in Florida, when you're putting this emergency kit together, should you look at a 24-hour period? Should you look at a 3-day period? Should you look at a 1-week period? How much do you really need to accumulate for what period of time?
And, you know, when you look at the demographics and the characteristics of our community are so, well, they're just different. You go into the town of Front Royal at Main Street, and you know, a loss of power there is typically restored within hours at the latest. Shenandoah Farms,
not so much.
Browntown, those types of areas, you very well could go days without power. You know, when you look at the preparedness, you know what you go through on a normal basis. You know what history has repeated. You know, we had a woman. She did really good. She started planning based off of our Facebook post, and she said, you know, hey, I'm new to the area. I live in a floodplain according to the FEMA map. You know, am I going to be affected by this? Well, unless you tell us, one, where you live, we can predict how much rain you get. So our suggestion to her was, go talk to your neighbors. You know, your neighbors, somebody's going to have been there for a good period of time. They're going to tell you, yeah, you know, strong winds, we're going to lose power. this much rain is going to raise the river. This is when you should start to get concerned. So if you're new to the area, talk to your neighbors. Ask them what they do, those types of things. Do I need to have a generator for the winter time? You know, do we have a large, power outage, those types of things? We'll pick on Chief. Chief bought a new house, beautiful house up in the mountains, and, how long were you there before you lost power?
A couple of weeks.
And he talked to the neighbor. He talked to the neighbor when he moved in. Hey, how often do you lose power? Guy's like, I never lose power, And that poor tree that fell in the front yard was about the size of that desk,
Well, and that's one of the things, you see in today that people tend to not want to talk to other people. We're all on Facebook, we're all using social media. Nobody wants to have a face-to-face conversation with anybody. And when you live in neighborhoods, that's usually the reason why you choose a neighborhood that you do, because of your surroundings. This is the perfect excuse to introduce yourself to your neighbor, to go knock on the door and say, hi, I'm Janet, I just moved in next door. I know we haven't met and I've been here for several months now, but there's a hurricane coming and I just want to ask you a few questions. You're not going to have somebody slam the door in your face,
no,
typically.
Absolutely.
And it's
not.
a great icebreaker to now know and have a place where you could go if something happens to your home.
In a community like Front Royal, Warren County is, you're absolutely right. People are homebodies. They want to do their own thing. But we are a very vigilant community when it comes to helping each other in times of need. And, if you said, hey, I'm Janet and I'm new to the area, I got a family of 4, I'm living here, and I just wanted to talk to you, they're going to come check on you. They're going to say, hey, wow, there was a family of 4, 2 kids. Jerry's got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And let me go see if they need anything, if they have enough water. Is there anything that I can help them with, Or, in our case, snow, let me go help them shovel their driveway. Those types of things. And that's where we see the community come together and help each other in need.
Well, and Rick, kind of related to that, people tend to forget that communication also goes down in a lot of cases. Cell towers get overloaded. You can't always call your husband to say, hey, I'm taking the kids and, we're going to mom's or whatever. This has gotten bad. Do you have some tips for how to manage communications when you're in a position where you're going to have to either evacuate your home or something has happened and you need to get the word out to somebody?
Buy an old school battery powered radio. Just go get you either an emergency weather radio or a small transistor radio that you can put some batteries in, and that's a great way to get news locally from folks like you, and get the word out when the internet goes down and you can't get your iPhone working because it's just not working.
Well, and I've read some things online recently that sometimes having making a long distance call with your cell phone will go through faster than trying to call your husband who is in town or in Winchester, for example. That those lines get clogged up, but long distance calls tend to go through. Texts work better than phone calls because they use a little bit less bandwidth and can get through. One of the other tips that I saw, and I wanted to ask you about this, is having someone who's maybe not even here. If you have a family member that lives in, Montana, or lives somewhere else, that they are the point of contact, so that if you're at home and you're taking the kids and the husband works in the city and he needs to get back and doesn't know where you are, having somebody out of the area that can be your public information officer, basically.
Right. That's right. That's just all part of a great communications plan with your family and close friends, and they could help out because they can let somebody else know, hey, I just talked to so-and-so and they're doing fine, or they said to go here if I hear from you, and that's just a great, always have a backup plan.
And having somewhere to meet that, like in my example, it would be at a coffee shop because, that's the easiest place to find me. But if you have people that are coming from all over, and you may have family members that live in, say they're living in Shenandoah Farms, but they're on separate ends of Shenandoah Farms, but it's 2 sisters saying, okay, if it gets bad, we're going to go and this is where we're going to be, meet us there, so everybody has a common meeting place even.
That's right. And even, going back to Jerry's pitch with fire safety, it's the same thing. If you have a fire in your home, you want your kids to know where to go outside, meet at the mailbox at the end of the driveway or wherever it is. It's the same thing. Maybe we go meet in the Walmart parking lot or something because it's big and there'll be plenty of room out there.
And writing this stuff down and going over it with the kids. I mean, there's not really a child too young to start talking to about this and keeping them calm. If they know what's going to happen, kids tend to not freak out.
No, absolutely. And communicate that plan not only with people that it's going to directly affect in the home, but your loved ones. That person in Montana. Let them know, hey, we're getting ready to evacuate the home, or we're going to go to seek shelter, and we're going to be there in the next 2 hours. And if you don't hear from us, call somebody. Let somebody know what you're doing. What your plan is, and that you're initiating that plan. But you're absolutely right. When we talk about home fire safety, and we do a really good job in the community with home fire safety. But it's the same concept when you look at disaster preparedness. We talked last night in that presentation is, if you would have asked me 20 years ago, Jerry, are you ever going to experience an earthquake in Virginia? And I'm going, no. Not
Right?
At all. But we understand that is now a true threat. And we as a community, we understood very quickly that our community was not well prepared for any type of earthquake disaster. While we didn't have a huge disaster, what we had an influx of fire alarm activations. Not because of the earthquake itself, but the human reaction. Something happened, something took place, we don't know what to do, and they started pulling the fire alarms. Hey, the building's shaking, we need to get out of the building. So they started pulling fire alarms and stuff. Well, that's not the right emergency action step for an earthquake. So now it inundates our emergency responders, and our focus is onto that false emergency versus where we can truly help.
So, Rick, do you have any tips for people on things to kind of be aware of? Some of the things that I found when I was looking, and some of them were kind of ingenious, actually. When I was looking online, Jerry mentioned that, sometimes you lose power and you leave the home because you realize it's going to be out for a while. Maybe you leave the stove on, and that's a mistake. One of the things that I saw online was to take a coffee cup and fill it full of water and set it in your freezer today. Leave that coffee cup in your freezer with a quarter sitting on top of that mug full of ice. Because if you leave and you're gone for several days, maybe your power was out, maybe it wasn't. You're leaving for any number of different reasons. You're leaving before you think maybe the power might go out because a tree may come down and you won't be able to get out. When you come back, look in the freezer. If that quarter is now frozen in the bottom of the mug, now you know that your power was out long enough that everything that was in your freezer is now bad.
That's right.
Some of this stuff online, it was fascinating to me, not ever having had to go through some of these big emergencies.
Well, I see that, my wife's a scrapbooker, and, so her entire life is documented in books. And, now we live on the top of a mountain, so if we have a flood, we're in really big,
that scrapbooking
problems.
Stuff is the least of our concern.
You kind of sit down and think, wow, and I seen a great tip about your dishwasher.
I just saw this one.
Take everything that's valuable pictures and put in your dishwasher. It's watertight, it's watertight, airtight, and no water should penetrate it. So you can put your pictures and stuff like that. That's of value, money, those types of things, and it protects it from any type of flood.
Make sure it's off and not on the rinse cycle.
Yeah, well, yeah. Make sure you try before you leave. Make sure that it wasn't in the middle of something, and I saw that same tip because that doesn't necessarily apply. I mean, it applies to those in Florida and Houston where the flooding is going to be so bad. But you could be in a tornado situation and the roof gets ripped off of your house and then it pours down rain and things are going to get ruined, but not if you toss everything. The other reason for that was that typically dishwashers are in a bank of cabinets,
right,
which then make them more secure within the home. So the chance of it being separated and your things spilling out.
Right.
Putting ice in your washing machine. Filling your washing machine full of ice to put water, to put sodas, to keep things in is a good secondary location if you lose power in your refrigerator, because when that ice melts, it's going to drain into your washer and you're not going to have another mess to clean up.
That's
right.
Some
stuff. I mean, I was on life hacks like crazy looking at some of this stuff. Wearing a helmet, a bicycle helmet. If you're in the car,
please walk around your house with
Can you imagine? Could you imagine me? But yeah, put on a bicycle or a horseback riding helmet to protect against flying debris. If you're going to go outside to check the outside of your, if you've got stuff flying around.
Right.
I did not know that in a pinch, you can use a AAA battery in a AA electronic. If you have flashlights and you stocked up on batteries and you bought all AAAs thinking that's what was going in your flashlights, and then you get home and you need them and realize, oh no, wait, I need AA. You can actually take a AAA battery, put it into your flashlight with a little tiny ball of tinfoil, and put that between the end of the battery and the connector, and it will work in an emergency to get you through if you don't have AA batteries.
I don't know. That doesn't sound fire
That
safe.
was proven. It's a flashlight. I'm not
sound
using it
fire
in my
safe,
smoke
okay.
detector. I'm using it in my...
You know, so you're absolutely right. And what you did, Janet, is what we really want the community to do. Research, find things that will work for you in your home for the many different disasters that can be encountered in Front Royal, Warren County, and the surrounding areas. Create the plans that Rick was talking about, the communication plans that you discussed. You know, because ultimately Chief Maybe's job is to ensure the safety of the community as a whole. You know, and the best way for us to protect 39,000 people is for you to protect yourself. You know, and that really makes his job, our job, Rick's job, our community emergency response team's job so much better as if you are prepared. You know, and that's all we're asking.
So that leads me to one of my last questions. Who pays for all this? When shelters have to be opened, when you have to, you know, go above and beyond, when every fire alarm in the county is going off because we had an earthquake, do you get additional funding? Can you go to the state? You hear now that the governors are all making, you know, state of emergencies, and that allows them to call the National Guard and things like that. Are there things that we can do from a donation standpoint? Is that built into a local budget? Where does the money come from for this sort of thing? You want me to write you a check?
You know I do.
So hopefully, when the governors declare an emergency, at the local level, we would declare an emergency, and if it goes past the federal threshold, then FEMA would support that emergency, and ultimately we could qualify for some federal funds reimbursement. There's quite the package you have to go through to submit for reimbursement, but that is one avenue. And then the other avenue, like you said, is just private donations. Church groups, organizations that pitch in, GoFundMe. Where were we the other day? We were getting something at Home Goods, and the corporation that owns Home Goods is going to give up to $500,000 or something to Texas if they collect it when you go to shop at that particular place. So, you know, money's out there.
Yeah.
You just have to go get it.
Well, and that's another thing, you know, yes, do your research, find out what you can do, figure out cool things, because the other cool thing is you tell people. When you learn something neat, you tell somebody else who then tells somebody else. That helps make your job a little bit easier. And from a funding perspective, be educated on the process and know that when you're hearing in the news about maybe funding cuts for FEMA, know that you may think, oh, that doesn't impact me. That only, you know, impacts the people that are living in hurricane, you know, zones or in Tornado Alley and things like that. FEMA goes to help them. FEMA doesn't come to help me, so that doesn't impact me. It kind of does sometimes on a local level then.
Right, that's right. So it's important just to know how it works, and then stay plugged into your churches and civic organizations, because a lot of times they'll announce that they're going to support something, and you can funnel your money through them, and it makes it easy to get it to the right places.
So here's my last question. I'm going to ask each of you, so brace yourself. I'm going to put Rick on the spot first. What's in your to-go bag right now? What's in your, what is it called, a bug-out bag? What's in your bag?
So that is a great point. Here's what I want to say about that, because I was thinking, because I've got family and friends here in the area. If I have to accept someone into my home, I would hope that they're going to come with their bug-out bag, so they don't expect me to feed, clothe them, have water for them, because I have that for my immediate family and those living in my home, but I don't have it for anybody else that I take in. So it's important to have the things in my bag would be food and water, batteries, a flashlight, a radio, for at least 3 days is what FEMA in the state recommends. If you go on a lot of these websites with the preppers, you know, they'll tell you really, if you can afford it, go to 2 weeks. Because you don't know, like Jerry said, depending on where you live in the community, you might have to go 2 weeks, or if you're in town, you might only have
That, you know, if I'm leaving my home and going somewhere else, that is somewhat of a burden. You're right. I'm not going to toothpaste, personal hygiene
Right.
items, things like that. If you don't, and then you get there, and of course, oh, I'm sorry, I can't eat that. I'm gluten free, and keep those kinds of things in mind, not just for yourself, but if you're going to go somewhere else.
Right, so be a good neighbor, but also be a good guest.
Yeah, yeah. An emergency doesn't mean you don't have to be a good guest.
That's right.
So, what's in your bug out bag?
I got a wife and 2 kids. Diapers, a hair dryer, curling iron. Just to reiterate what Rick said is the necessities, the things that are going to get you through that 2-3 day time frame. That's not going to inconvenience others, as you're seeing now. In the national news, you can't buy a case of water in Florida. You can't get a gas on the way out of town. You're not stopping at a grocery store picking up a loaf of bread. So you've got to have these essential items in your home ready to go, in the event. My bug out bag, I'm coming to work. I'm not getting trapped in that house, Yeah. Love you, babe. I'll talk to you soon.
So that means your bug out bag has to have enough stuff to feed him and keep him out of your office while he's there.
It's a big bag.
That's a really big bag.
I'm gonna get me a bug out bag.
The bug out of the office when I show up,
Yeah.
right? So,
A couple things I think we need to share as well as, and I think people down in Texas have found this out that certainly depending on the size of the disaster, that first responders and all are affected by this as well. Whether they're trapped at a fire station or trapped at home, we try to look at our staffing. Well, we do that all the time anyway, to see, where our deficiencies are and, whether it's hiring part-time people back and this, that, and the other. Most of our major disasters here, we call all of our people back because we have stations that aren't staffed normally, and we will staff those stations and so forth. Now, who pays for that? Well, we pay for it unless it's a declared disaster.
And that goes into the paperwork for
all the
FEMA
way
that
up
you
to
could
the
potentially.
federal. Well, I'll give you an example. The snowstorm we had, I think, 2 winters ago, where we called everybody back. We just got that money back last month
From 2 years ago.
from 2 years ago. Well, 2 winters. Let me say that.
Well,
2
but-
winters. So that's how people can keep it in their mind that they need to help themselves, because our people may not be able to, one, get to them, or they may not be there to come get them in a timely fashion.
Right. Because
And
they've
so
got,
forth.
and it's all about priority. It's the Smart 911 that you mentioned earlier. You've got to get to those people who have a higher emergency level necessarily than a healthy mom and dad and family of 3 when you've got a 68-year-old grandmother who's on a respirator. You're going to have to prioritize some of those rescues and that sort of thing in an emergency. So that makes sense. And you bring up an interesting point, too, because we need to also realize and understand you guys are out there trying to help and protect us. So whenever possible, helping you back, making sure that if we can get out, dropping off some cases of water at the fire station for you guys, seeing if we know that we live in the neighborhood where a firefighter is, a police officer is, any of that, and they're probably on duty, stop in and check in on their wife and their kids. Can we get you anything? Do you want to come? Can I take your kids for a couple of hours and let them play at my house so the wife
that
gets a
doesn't have
break?
to be a disaster for the.
Yeah, but that
A lot
brings
of
up a
our
good point.
volunteers, too, the disaster may be in Warren County. They work in Northern Virginia. They got to go to work.
Yeah.
you know,
It doesn't.
and so forth. So, our guys do really well when it comes to that. Of course, we release them when they can get out a lot of times, and so forth. But with some wood here, just a little bit. We've been extremely lucky on really local disasters here. Yeah, we've had some events and so forth, but local disasters, I remember the first year I came here, and I started work the 1st of August, and through Labor Day weekend we had a flood. And I was asking myself then, what did I got myself into? Those, for some reason, those events have become far and few in between. And of course, part of the process is after the disaster, we go in and look and see how we can mitigate the next disaster, whether it's for flooding, moving people out of the flood zone. There's federal funds a lot of times for that if you declare it a local disaster. You get them out, you don't have to take care of them on the next flood.
Well, and I think the one thing too, we've talked a lot about these natural disasters, and we've talked about floods and hurricanes and that sort of thing. The other thing that I think a lot of us, especially in this community, need to keep in mind is that we're just 45 minutes outside of D.C., which means there are other non-natural disasters that could potentially happen. We see in the news how crazy North Korea and all that sort of thing is. Being that close to our center of government may not create a disaster necessarily if something happens there, but we have to keep in mind, where are all of those people going to come?
Right.
This is where they're going to be.
And same concept. Our grocery stores are going to be overrun. They're not going to have the stuff on the shelf. So, you've got to have that essential supplies in your home to get through that 2 or 3 day period.
So, Joe Woodall, who's hiding over here in the corner, you can't see him, you just hear him snicker every once in a while. What's in your bug out bag?
I don't have one.
Yeah.
One last thing from the couch is it made me do one of these.
Bug out bag.
It's called age.
Ready.gov is a fantastic federal website that the buku information, and a lot of information that's come out here too. But I would say they would put you in a spot where you've got your bug out bag.
I don't need one.
I have a bug out bag. How can you not have one when I have one? Now, granted, mine is probably completely different from what any of these people would tell me should be in it because it's full of instant coffee and round 11 potato chips. But that's what I'm going to need to get through.
I have my gun, bottle of water, I'm good.
So you're not planning on bugging out for long with just one bottle of water?
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere.
Well, I want to thank...
No, he's coming to the radio station.
Yeah, that's where he's going to come. He's going to have to come here to tell everybody else where to go and what to do and what you guys are doing. But I want to thank you guys. This was one of those last-minute things. You guys were just here on the Valley today last week, and this idea kind of spurred out of that because I thought we needed a little bit more of an in-depth conversation. So we put this on Facebook. This video will also be available on our website later this afternoon, and there you will find links to ready.gov, to FEMA, the link to find out whether or not you are living in a flood zone here in Warren County. We'll get all of that information up there. WarrenCountyFire.org, always a great place, or com, is a great place to go. Your Facebook, you do a fairly good job of maintaining that.
We've got a report, you look at the news and the weather, and this hurricane is supposed to go west, don't take it
right
for
now.
Granted.
Right now. That could change, and that's the crazy thing about weather. And there are pockets even of just severe thunderstorms in our area. You'll see pockets where, Warren County may get pounded and nothing happens in Strasburg. Strasburg didn't get a drop of rain. So it does change just that fast. Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming.
As always, it's
You're
pleasure.
welcome.
Now it's your turn to tell me how great I am and what a fabulous idea this was.
Turn the camera
We
off.
don't want to lie to the camera.
We're done here.
We're out.
I want a cup of coffee.